Hi, and welcome to the VCSP How-To video series. My name is Brandon McCoy. I'm an Inside Systems Engineer Advisor here at Veeam Software, and today I want to talk to you about how to do a backup copy job leveraging Cloud Connect. Now, before we get into the lab where I'm going to show you how to set the job up, how to add everything, and even some important information around restores, let's take a step back and talk about something that you may be familiar with called the 3-2-1 rule. And this is really the reason why we want to have a backup copy job. So what is the 3-2-1 rule? The 3-2-1 rule is having 3 copies of your data on 2 different types of media, with one of those media being off-site, and then potentially also having one of those offline or air-gapped. And in some cases, this would be called the 3-2-1-1 rule. But it's kind of the same concept. And so how this works, what are those 3 copies of your data? Well, the first one is the production data. That's whether that's your VMs on VMware Hyper-V, your physical machines using the Veeam agents. And so that's going to be your first copy, is the actual data itself, right? So the second copy of your data is going to be your first backup, which is a local backup on a local disk in most cases. So this could be a Veeam server repository, or it could be a Linux hardened repository, or even a NAS device or a USB drive. Then you have your third copy of your data, which is the backup copy job off-site, and in this case the off-site would be Cloud Connect. So now you've got your one off-site, and then you can further protect your backups from ransomware with insider protection or immutability. Now, depending on the type of storage that you use, insider protection and or immutability may or may not be available. So it just depends on whether you're using, for instance, object storage or a Linux hardened repository, or you're just using traditional Windows or NAS type of repository. Either way, there are some additional options there to protect those backups. Okay, so how do we achieve this? Well, there's a few components here. We're just going to keep it simple in today's video. So on the customer side, they have backup and replication. So backup and replication is required in order to do a backup copy job. So sometimes we'll get asked, I've got a customer, they've got a bunch of standalone endpoints, laptops, physical machines. So I've put an agent on those machines. I would like to back it up locally, and then I would like to have another backup in my cloud or an object storage, wherever. That is possible, but you have to create 2 separate jobs, one local and then a completely separate job that goes to the cloud. Whereas if you have a backup and replication server on-prem, you'll be able to do the first backup and then create a backup copy job, which we're going to do in the lab today, from the backup and replication server. Now, backups are sent to the service provider via what we call a Cloud Connect gateway. This is the Veeam component that the service provider deploys. And this creates a TLS tunnel, or transport layer security. This is just an upgraded version of SSL, and it's going to encrypt the network communication provided with an SSL certificate, verifying and authenticating a handshake between the client and the server to make sure that everything is where it's supposed to be and everyone is who they say they are. And then finally, the receiving end is the Cloud Connect repository. A little fun fact, Cloud Connect is just backup and replication. So if you're looking at this diagram, really backup and replication on the customer side, backup and replication on the service provider side. However, the service provider has a different license called Cloud Connect, which allows this functionality of receiving backups through a secure network tunnel and requiring no VPNs. So that's enough slides. Let's jump into the lab, and I'm going to walk you through how to do a backup copy job to Cloud Connect step by step. Now, in the lab here, I'm on version 12.1 of backup and replication. And the first thing I want to do is I want to go to my backup infrastructure tab right here. Once I'm there, I'm going to navigate to the service provider tab up here. And I want to add in a service provider. I can right click, or I could do it from the top here, but since I've already got a service provider added, I'm just going to edit the existing one. Now, the first thing that it's going to ask for is an IP address or a DNS. Most of your service providers will use a DNS name. They will give you this information when you set up your infrastructure and your backup resources with them. For here, I'm just using a local host name. Typically this would be like a something.com. And again, your service provider will give you this information. So once you've got that added in here, you can see that port 6180 is the port that is on the service provider side. So this is not a port that you, the customer, has to open. This is already open on the service provider side, and they've got all the networking firewall rules that they need. And then Veeam is providing the Cloud Connect, which is really a TLS or Transport Layer Security Tunnel. It's just an upgraded version of SSL. Basically, it means that you don't need a VPN and you can securely send your backups to a service provider over an encrypted network tunnel. Now, this checkbox here allows this Veeam backup and replication installation to be managed by the service provider. So checking this box does a number of things. Now, for the service provider, one of the big things it does is it allows your Veeam server to show up in their single pane of glass called the Veeam Service Provider Console. Now, this is an MSP tool, and this allows your service provider to see all of their customers' Veeam servers from a single pane of glass. This can also allow the service provider to remote into your Veeam server to manage their jobs, edit things, do restores for you. So it really depends on the relationship you have with your service provider as whether or not you want to check this box. Now, if you do check this box, what it's going to do is install something called the Veeam Management Agent that we can see here. Okay, so checking this box equals install this management agent. And this is a lightweight MSI file that is going to, again, allow your server to show up in their single pane of glass. Click next here. So you may get a security alert pop-up. This depends on the type of SSL certificate your service provider is using. Veeam does allow for their own self-signed generated certificate through Veeam, but a lot of times you won't see this message. It just depends on how they've set up their certificate. If you do see this certificate, you can click continue. If you have more questions as to some of the information that you get from this alarm, please reach out to your service provider so that they can explain further. So we see the certificate here, and what this means is that your Veeam server is connecting to the service provider Veeam server, and we have established a TLS handshake, meaning that we know that server is the one you're connecting to. The next thing you're going to want to do is add your username and password. This is something that the service provider, again, has provided to you. So in this case, let's just use the existing username and password that are already in there. We'll click apply, and it'll go through the process of adding the service provider, doing a rescan so they can see whatever storage that you have. So in this case, my service provider has given me a 200 gig repository with WAN acceleration disabled. WAN acceleration is a way for your backups to go to your service provider a little faster. This is an optional component that your service provider may or may not offer. Now, replica resources are for DR. We're not going to get into that in this video, so I'm just going to skip that, as well as this piece right here. Okay, so then we'll click apply. I'm going to wait for that to finish, and then we're going to go ahead and create our job. So now that we've added in our service provider and we've seen the resources that they've provided to us, it's time to create our job. Now, real quick, before we do that, let's just, for sanity check, look at our backup infrastructure tab. And instead of going to service providers, we're now going to go to backup repositories. You should see the cloud repository that your service provider has created for you, and you'll see that the type of repositories says cloud, and an address to that repository with how much free and used space that you have in that repository. All right, so let's go ahead and go back to the Home tab, and let's start creating a job. Now, there are two types of jobs. There's the backup job and there's the backup copy job. Both of these are supported for Cloud Connect, so you can back up directly to Cloud Connect. However, this is typically not recommended for two reasons. The first, you're not adhering to the 3-2-1 rule, which means you have 3 copies of your data on 2 devices with 1 offsite. So you have your production data, you have a local backup, and then you have a backup copy job to your Cloud Connect repository. The second reason this may not be a good idea is because imagine you're backing up some virtual machines that are using VMware snapshots or Hyper-V checkpoints. During the backup process, these snapshots remain open, and this can lead to reduced performance on your virtual machines. So it's best to remove those snapshots as quick as possible. So backing up to a local repository, in theory, should be faster than backing up to a service provider across the internet. So we're going to do a backup copy job for this video to follow best practices. Now, you'll notice there's 2 options here, backup copy and copy job. Just want to really quickly point this out because they're so close together. A copy job is something completely different. It's like an ad hoc backup, so don't click that button. Instead, click the backup copy. Okay. So the backup copy job window appears. We'll just leave the name as is. You can call it whatever you want, of course. Any kind of description you'd like to add for this repository. And you'll notice that there's 2 different copy modes. So starting from version 11, I believe, we introduced this immediate copy mode. And now this is really the most popular method and will probably be the preferred method for Veeam sometime in the future. It is typically what we recommend. So immediate copy is exactly what it sounds like. As soon as the backup finishes, we'll copy it to the other location. Now you can put some times where backups are not allowed to happen, but more or less as soon as the backup's finished, it's going to go to the Cloud Connect provider's data center. There's another method called periodic copy. So periodic copy is more of a pruning or a synchronization method where you tell Veeam when you would like the backup copy job to happen, and it's only going to take the latest restore point available during that time period, right? So maybe you're doing a local backup every hour for the day for those quick, frequent backups, and then you're doing a backup copy job to Cloud Connect at the end of the day to have like a daily consolidation, if you will. Now it's only going to have that one specific time of the day, but again, you've got your hourlies local, and then you have the end of the day in Cloud Connect. And this is just an example. This is the older version, and this was the only version available prior to V11, I believe. So again, immediate mode is the more popular one, and that's what we're going to focus on today, although I will show you a few things for both so you can make your own choice there. So starting with immediate mode, I'm going to skip ahead just to show you the differences really between immediate and periodic. So with immediate copy mode selected, if I go down to the scheduling option, you'll see that it doesn't ask me how many backups I want to have, what time of the day I want to have the backups. It just says, when am I allowed to transfer these backups, right? We've already got the restore points in the local repository, right? And I'm just waiting for the ability to send those to my service provider based on the times of day it's allowed to happen. Now, compare that to immediate copy. If we go back down to scheduling, you'll see that this opens up the regular type of job scheduling you'd be used to in any other backup job. So what time of the day would you like to run these backups? So in my example earlier, once every hour, and then maybe at 10 p.m., the end of business hours, whatever you need right here. So you have the ability to kind of create its own schedule per se. So again, we're going to stick with immediate copy for now. And if I click next, okay, we're going to see what would you like to do a backup copy of. Now, we are revising this video because there are a lot of new features, and one of them is this right here. So in previous versions, there would be 3 tabs here, from jobs, from repositories, as well as from infrastructure. Really, all this meant was that this is going to show you a list of available machines or restore points or repositories or jobs to select. We've made it a little bit easier and just simplified it. So you can either pick backups from a certain job, or you can pick up backup from a certain repository. Maybe you want to do a backup copy job of every backup in this specific repository or maybe just this job. So I'm going to pick just a specific job. So I've created a virtual machine backup job going to a local repo. It's actually the default repository, which is my Veeam server. It doesn't really matter, but just for detail here. Okay, so we'll click OK. All right, we've got an option here to include database transaction log backups. So this isn't going to happen by default. You have to select this. This is going to be for like your SQL logs and things like that. Okay. All right. The other things here, I'm not really going to get into exclusions. You are able to exclude some specific things, so take a look at that if you want to get some more information. Okay, so target. So this is the backup repository that I need to choose, and here we see the cloud repository that my service provider gave me. And you do see that I have a retention policy. So even though this immediate copy is keeping the same the same frequency, the retention can be its own thing. So you're keeping the hourly backups for the day in my example, but you're keeping a maybe hourly backups here as well for a week or a month, or even with the periodic, you could do a daily backup at the end of the day and keep it for 30 days. So you do have a choice of retention even with the periodic mode. Okay, so for this, let's do this. Let's do a classic example of 30 days, okay, and keep certain full backups longer for archival purposes. Let's click this. Okay, so GFS retention policy is not configured. So I'm going to click configure, and what this is going to allow me to do is roll up my daily backups into, let's say, 4 weeklies for the month, 12 monthlies for the year, and we'll change that to the last week of the month, and then maybe 7 years for HIPAA, and we'll do it the last month of the year. So this is, of course, customizable to your specific needs. This is just an example I use on demos. Okay. Now, this means that we're going to synthesize the existing restore points on the Cloud Connect repository. So when you see here that this is going to create full backups, all right, that does not mean that we're taking a full backup from the local environment and pushing it across the internet again. It's all happening on the Cloud Connect repository side. Okay, now you do have the option to read entire restore points from source. So that would be taking it back from production. That would be if you needed like a clean backup for whatever reason. Maybe you're afraid of some malware on the existing ones. But typically the synthetic is the way to go to avoid extra ingress egress fees. Okay, so let's click, actually let's go back one, the advanced tab here. So we'll just take a look. There are a few new features here. We might as well get into it. Health checks. So we can do a health check. This is going to scan the repository and see if there's any blocks that maybe are corrupted or missing, unreadable. We'll check against the CRC metadata file, the VBM file in the Veeam backup, and we can actually swap those blocks on the fly. This is a pretty intensive process. And if you're using something like Sure Backup, you may or may not need this. So really look into that a little further. Talk to your service provider before you do that. Okay, and then there's some full backup file maintenance. This is good if you have a forever forward backup. So that means that you're not really doing the weeklies, monthlies, yearlies. You're just continuing on. We can kind of defrag those backup files. Okay, the compression levels here. I would leave it on automatic and just leave that up to your service provider because you don't know what kind of repositories they're using and how they're set up. So I would leave most of that to them. You can encrypt your backup files. Some service providers require this, right? So this allows your backups to be encrypted. So if anybody else were to take your backups, maybe if your service provider got hacked or somebody stole their repository and tried to restore your backups, right? They would be prompted for a password in that scenario. The RPO monitor, so this is going to alert you if your backup copy jobs haven't finished within a certain amount of time. If you haven't, you're no longer in compliance with your backup needs. Get an email notification, and then you can also run some scripts on the job. Okay, so we'll kind of just brush through those real quickly for time's sake of this video. I talked about Win acceleration a little earlier. I'm not going to get it too much into it in this video. Reach out to your service provider for more information on that. So we'll just leave it as direct. Okay, we already talked about the scheduling. In this scenario, I'm just going to let it run whenever it needs to. And I'm done. So I'm going to click apply. If I check this box, enable the job when I finish. So yep. And This will show up under your backup copy job. And you can see here that it says next run as new restore point appears, right? So again, we're in the immediate mode, so it's just waiting for that restore point to be available, and it will begin to push that out. All right, so now that we have our backup copy job in the Cloud Connect repository, the last thing I want to show you is some of the differences between a normal backup job restore and a Cloud Connect restore. So there's a few different ways to request a restore from the Veeam console. For this specific example, I want to go to the backup window here. So under backups, I've got backups that are on a local disk, and then I've got backups that are in my Cloud Connect repository. So if I go to the job that I just sent to my service provider and I open the drop down here, so this is the actual backup, and I right click, you'll notice that there's quite a few restore options that are not available. Okay, the big ones are going to be instant recovery and restore to the cloud, as well as grabbing individual guest files, right? Typically you want to do this with your local backup. For instance, instant VM recovery. What we do there is we spin up the virtual machine at your local environment, and we're reading the data from the repository, which in this case is in a service provider's data center, who knows where, right? So from a bandwidth perspective, it's just not going to perform well, so that's been disabled. Some of the other options, restore to the cloud, those options aren't available. So if you see some of these options that you would like to do a restore with and the option's not available, talk to your service provider. Typically what they can do is take your backup and import it into a secondary Veeam server and do whatever kind of restore that you need, right? So these options just may not be available to you as a customer right off the bat. That's going to be it for this. I hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you next time.